I've switched on the recording now, and rather than have any sort of chit-chat, I think we can just dive straight in, because I had a look at that interview and everything like that. So the first thing we do is have like 5 seconds of silence, just to mean that the sound engineer can take out the hiss in the background in principle. So that's what we'll do now, okay? Good morning, good evening, good night, whatever time of day it is, Project Kazimierz listener. Today we've got a very interesting guest on the podcast. He set up a site called Squash Skills, and it's Mr. Jethro Binns. Rather than me try to introduce you, Jethro, could you do that yourself, as if you'd just bumped into someone at a party or some kind of event and they asked you that famous question, what do you do?
Hi, Richard. I think I wear a couple of different hats. Primarily, I see myself as a squash coach turned entrepreneur, I guess, who has set up a business which primarily focuses on online squash coaching. So obviously using the web to deliver coaching to the masses, I guess. We're in a very fortunate position in that we've managed to engage lots of the world's best players and coaches on the platform, so we're able to provide world-class coaching to players of all levels, regardless of where they are in the world. So I'm the founder of that. I set the company up about 5 years ago. I was a professional squash club player. Prior to that, I got injured, then turned my attention to coaching, and then set up Squash Skills. I'm based in Bristol, which obviously is England. I've been here for about 7 or 8 years now, and Squash Skills is my primary focus, but I have other kind of sidelines. Run an events company where we put on large events, about 2,000 to 3,000 people, generally dance music events, underground, disco, techno, house music. I've been involved with record label as well, but primarily squash is the number one focus, but there's a few other bits going on as well.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that introduction. And when I told people that, because I became a customer of your service just a couple of months ago, and what was happening was that little squash videos were popping up on my Facebook profile, and I'm enough of a tech-savvy person to know that if I play squash and that's happening, there must be something interesting going on in the background. It's not by chance. And then I signed up and was really impressed by the scale of the service, and thought it'd be interesting to talk to you about the background of the business and everything like that. But what could you give a sense of the scale of the business in terms of I mean, maybe don't reveal anything confidential, but in terms of the number of people who work for you, or the number of users or paying users, or do you have freemium, or how do people get on board? What are you ready to share about the scale of the business?
I think we're in a pretty exciting place now as a company, in the sense that we've, over the course of 5 years, we've gone from this little concept with me on a laptop and a pretty crappy camera making some videos on a court to, I guess, one of the most widely regarded brands in the squash world now. I think we've got a Facebook audience of about 93,000, Instagram, it's around 30,000, I think. And then registered users, we're about 53,000 users on the site, and paying subscribers, we're around 5,000. So I'm happy to share that. So 5,000 members. We're across all areas of the world. Primary markets, generally the English-speaking ones. So UK, US, Canada, Australia, India, South Africa tends to be our top 6. We've got 9 world number ones on the site, and then a number of coaches who have coached world number ones, as well as a host of other great squash players and squash coaches who haven't quite made it to number one. But we're very fortunate in that we've got the support of the PSA, the Professional Squash Association. We've got some strong partnerships. We're exploring partnerships with England Squash, European Squash. So we kind of dived into a space that obviously nobody else was in. Nobody really knew if you could learn a sport online, I think, prior to us diving in and giving it a go. So I mean, it was kind of a daunting day.
Well, thank you for sharing the numbers, and certainly it's the reaction that I've got from some people that I told I've signed up for this online squash course, and you see people looking at you and say, basically, you're joking. How would that work? And I think that and I suppose I'm not the first person that you've met who's reacted. I've bought in because I'm into online technologies, but I'm very much an early adopter of new technologies. My apartment is littered with sort of like failed technical things that I bought from years ago that never worked. But what do you say to someone who just like basically disbelieves that you can learn squash online? Because presumably you meet people and they say, "Come off it. How do you do that?" And it's not exactly intuitive, is it?
Yeah, it's an interesting one because you face. There's no denying that getting on call with a coach and having a one-on-one lesson with an expert who can identify exactly what is going wrong with your game or what is wrong with your swing isn't beneficial, and that's going to allow you to make massive strides forward just having a half an hour lesson. But the thing that you're confined to is the quality of that coach, their ability to identify those issues, and then that 40-minute window in which you've got to practice and improve. Whereas Squash Skills gives you the ability to access the world's best players and coaches. And yes, you have to identify the problems in your own game or your own technique or your own swing. But there's this library of, we're 3,500 videos now, so we're covering a big variety of, or the whole spectrum really of the sport. And we've got different people's ideas and perceptions about how the sport should be played. So you have to cherry pick that. You have to go work through the site and identify what resonates with you and try and think, that's the reason my backhand's not very good. That tip would be really useful. So I think the idea that you have to dive in and identify what works for you and what doesn't, maybe try things out, means that it could be a slightly longer process than that, just that half an hour lesson or 45-minute lesson with the local pro. But what you are getting is that insight and knowledge into the world's best players and coaches who've been there, who've done it, who know this is how you deliver results. The best coaches know how to coach a world number one, so they know how to convey the information that you need or the teaching points so that you can understand it. So I think that's the exciting thing that Squash Skills offers, is this vast library, this vast diversity that the players must then understand and try and put into their own game. So I think that's the key. It can definitely be done. You've just got to understand your own game a little bit more before putting the changes in place.
Yes, I mean, unfortunately, I hope it's not a bad injury, but I had to stop around a month ago. I've got some knee problems, so I haven't been able to follow up that much. But I've been playing for more than 30 years with never having any coaching, and just the really, really simple things I just never knew about. I'd learned how to serve. You serve so the ball strikes a sidewall before it reaches, the fact that it's a disaster to give your opponent the opportunity to volley. I kind of knew that, but having a world expert say that, it just sort of, something very, very simple can make a really big difference. And that's not to negate as you said, did you say there's 3,500 or 350 videos up there?
No, 3,500 videos. I think that's really interesting just to hear you say that. But to me, it's so obvious that the serve must hit the sidewall or should hit the sidewall, but you forget that people who are completely new to the game, why would they know that if they've not had any coaching? So I think having this library that covers all aspects of the sport means that people can just dive in and pick up these tidbits, which actually can dramatically improve their game just by doing something as simple as focusing on your serve,
Yeah, and that's just one thing. But I think the other thing I'd say is that, one of the reasons I think this is a very interesting topic for our audience, who are primarily entrepreneurs and people interested in innovation, is that although you're talking about squash, this can be very much generalized. There's a famous project on the education project on the internet called Khan Academy, set up by an American, Salman Khan, who started teaching online. And some of his, I think he started teaching his nephews maths and recording them YouTube videos because he wasn't in the same place. And as he said on the TED stage, he soon discovered something very surprising, that his nephew told him he prefers the video to him. And the point was that if he's teaching live and he doesn't understand something, he feels a bit embarrassed to stop and say. But if it's a video, you can stop, rewind, and you don't have that sense of failure or scrutiny when you're talking, when it's a machine that's talking to you. And obviously, if you're with a coach, the coach can give you feedback about your game, but you don't necessarily get the best angle to see the coach demonstrating how to do things, and you see them once and you forget. So it's not just that you're using the internet. It's different, but in some ways it's actually, I would say it's actually better than having a coach in the court, isn't it?
Yeah, that's a fascinating point. I hadn't thought about it in quite that way. I mean, I've always seen it as, we've used marketing strap lines as like having the 10 world number ones in your pocket. With the advent of mobile technology, you've got the opportunity just to dive back into that video at any point. You can be on the bus going to the court, or on the train going to the court, and you can pull out that video and you can refresh it. You can watch it as many times as you want until it becomes fully ingrained, or you can pull it up on the court and you can, as you say, you can hit the ball, then you can stop, then you can rewind, and it's that, it's not in real time. You're not chasing your tail, essentially, are you? You've got that ability to stop, pause, rewind, reflect, and digest. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Which
one thing it's because I don't know your product that well. Do you offer a service where people can record themselves and upload themselves playing, and sort of like as a premium product, then have someone review their individual game? Is that something that's in the platform or coming?
It was. And it's not right now, and will probably be something that comes back. I guess primarily we partnered up with a company called V1 who specialise in golf swing analysis. So they have a really great tool where you can film yourself. I mean, there's lots of other products around, like Coach's Eye as well, where people can film themselves on their phone and then send it over. And in the early days, Peter and I were doing those, and they just became a bit time heavy. We were a very small, naive, young company. That was myself and Peter, and we were trying to work out ways to generate cash. So we thought that would be a brilliant idea. So $20 lesson, you could send your swing off to Peter Nichols, one of the greatest squash players of all time, and get your swing analysed. And that would take Peter and I it was no more than a 5-minute video, but it would possibly take 15-20 minutes to actually do this analysis, and then send it back. And then you soon realise that actually, if you're doing too many of those a week, then you're not focused on growing the business. And the true scalability of this business is in creating a library and growing subscriptions, because that doesn't require our man hours, for people to actually ultimately become a subscriber. So it just became a little bit time heavy, but I 100% think it's a great idea. Lots of people, got great benefit from that, because you could use side-by-side comparisons to the pros. People could really see what they were doing compared to a professional swing. And it's definitely something I want to re-explore, but probably using other coaches to deliver, rather than taking time away from myself and Peter, who obviously, myself and I'm primarily running the business, but taking time away from us from day to day.
No, it's because I remember quite often sitting in the rest area. Very often squash courts have got the CCTV somewhere in the reception, just like recording what's going on. And I remember years ago just thinking, could that be uploaded into the cloud and someone somewhere just give you feedback about your game, so the content's being captured? And I think that you could certainly have a revenue share where someone somewhere, maybe even listening to this podcast, could contact you and say, look, send the video to me, I'll analyse it. And then obviously you could have different levels. You could have like basic feedback, I'll look through it and fast forward and give you 10 minutes, or I'll go through in real time, and you'll be on Skype, I'll be on Skype, I'll be going through, and like one thing might cost $20 and another $100, and if you have a world champion coaching you could charge more than that. So I'd have thought that it's a natural way to offer people more? And technically, it wouldn't be that difficult, and you could obviously. It's just a question of money, really, isn't it? That it takes so much time.
That's it. It's time. We do offer it on the fitness side of things. Gary offers bespoke training programs and Skype calls. Mm-hmm. So there's personal training brands available. We've got a gold and a platinum package, a bit more contact, and it's definitely something that makes a lot of sense. It's just, what's the focus of the business, and at the moment we're focusing on growth and increasing subscriber base. So just time, resource, prioritization. Yeah. So it's definitely something that will definitely.
Okay, I was curious, and I'm interested in the bit of the financing and the history of the business. But if we go back, one of the things that I'm always interested in, I think the listeners are too, is what we call the entrepreneurial journey. That I know from my research that you were a very keen squash player when you were growing up, but you had these other businesses. And were you encouraged to be an entrepreneur? Did you see yourself as an entrepreneur? Did you know what an entrepreneur was? And at what stage in your life did it occur to you that it might be a better thing for you to do your own thing rather than work for other people? And what did your family think about that?
Yeah, it's an interesting one, because I think focusing on an individual sport means it's all about you. If you don't put the hours in, ultimately you're not going to get anywhere. So I started playing squash at 7, and that became a passion at 10, really. And then went through school, was Welsh national champion at every junior age group, and by kind of 15, 16 it became apparent that this was potentially a career option. So at 16 there was a coaching badge, or I got my coaching badge and was delivering some lessons to other pupils in school and earning a bit of money there, and then trying to run some after school clubs. So there was this desire to kind of eke out cash where I could. Squash isn't the most lucrative of sports, that's for sure, until you go and move on and do coaching in the States. That's kind of a natural progression and pathway. But for me, it was get the coaching qualifications, and then I went pro for a year in my gap year between 18 and 19. I went off to South Africa and trained there. So the desire to earn cash, that wasn't at the forefront of mind. It was, how do I become as good at this sport as I possibly can? Because being an 18, 19-year-old squash player, scraping £30 for a squash match here and there is not the way to make your millions.
But just to stop you there, obviously, I'm assuming that squash is like any other sport at a high level. It's a very major time commitment. You have to train, and how many hours? Obviously, you had your schoolwork and stuff, but how many hours a day were you putting into your squash? Because it's more than a hobby when you're doing it at that level, isn't it?
Yeah, it was kind of, I guess, during my early teens, it was playing 4 or 5 times a week, plus tournaments at weekends, trying to squeeze in some training at lunchtime. As you get to 17, 18, you're trying to get 2 sessions in a day, and then once you're full time, it really is. It's 2 to 3 sessions a day, and rest is equally as important as training at that level. So you're putting in lots of hours. It's 2 to 3 sessions a day, 5.5 days a week. That was generally my rule, unless we had obviously competitions at the weekend. So there was definitely a balance in school, which was education and squash, and then that shifted as I went to university. At that point, I guess the university lifestyle creeps in, so then you're suddenly balancing a social life with study and then squash. But that was a kind of fascinating time, because I went to Loughborough University in the middle of the UK, and that gave me a real opportunity to play a number of different leagues all around the country. So I was playing North West Counties League on a Tuesday, Yorkshire League on a Wednesday, Welsh League on a Thursday, and then some foreign leagues at the weekend. So I was kind of chasing around in a beat-up car, doing 1,000 miles a week, trying to scrape the pennies together where I could, which was nice through university. I was in a privileged position where I could earn some cash. Whereas other students wouldn't necessarily.
From your squash, the people were paying you to train them, were they? Was that the basic?
No. This was to play league matches. So I'd play for a team in the Yorkshire League, and I'd get £80 or £100 to play, and then I'd go and do the same for a different team in another league, and was doing that 2 to 3 times a week.
Okay. So it's okay. It's okay, but it's not going to make you rich, right? It's just it's. I mean, it might surprise. I mean, I don't know anything about the world of professional sport, but sometimes people imagine they hear about the headline figures of footballers and imagine that all sports pros are very rich. And from what you're saying, that was not the case.
Not the early days of, certainly not when you're ranked 220 in the world at squash. You're barely, you're not paying. There's not many people hitting the tax threshold at that level.
For our non-British listeners, who are most of them, I think the tax threshold is around £12,000 a year or £10,000.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is less than a decent software developer gets in Krakow. So and the UK is much more expensive than Krakow, as everyone knows. So, but then you had your side business, your record business. So it's trying to figure out where, because obviously you had, to an extent, you had a slightly unusual childhood. That you had your big thing that consumed a big chunk of your sort of. It's not just your time, but also it must be your psychological energy. You've got this thing that's much more important to you than most teenagers' hobbies, right? I would guess, and so that like takes both your energy and your ambition to some extent. But you set up this record label or event business, and where did that come from in your character? If you can sort of nestle it out, because was it just you needed to make money and this occurred to you as a way to do it?
No, that was another way of not making a lot of money. To be fair, I mean, I think we've skipped out a chunk of time because we went. Maybe we'll just touch upon the record label afterwards. If I just explain the journey from post-university, that went on to playing on the world tour and travelling. I managed to get some lottery funding. At the time, became Welsh champion and started climbing the ranks. So I became very fortunate in that I was able to go and travel the world, playing the world tour, and got up to 86 in the world, and was flying off to Colombia, Ecuador, the States, Australia. It was a really exciting time, particularly as a young 20-something, to be seeing the world and playing the sport you love, but ultimately not really earning a great deal of cash. And then I went off to the World University Championships in Cairo and was playing in the quarterfinals there, and then slipped. I did the splits going into a front corner. Did the splits, did the lunge, and then I managed to tear my hamstring off my pelvis, which meant that it was 7 months out of action. So I'd just become the largest mover in the world for that year, up to 86. And then suddenly it was surgery, had to have my hamstring reattached. And that was a bit of a game changer, really. Eventually came back on tour 7 months later, played a tournament in San Francisco, and did quite well. But then the following season was just a real struggle. You can imagine one hamstring being slightly shorter than the other, or slightly tighter than the other. So just struggled with injuries, struggled to be fit, and I had a really tough year, which ultimately resulted in me losing my lottery funding, and then losing lottery funding, which was about £8,000 a year to fund flights to tournaments, and that made it just about possible to kind of float around at 100 in the world. That disappeared, and that became a reality. It was right, I'm going to have to go and earn some money, and professional squash is going to be a real struggle here. So at that point, I moved to Bristol with a coach, Hadrian Stiff, who's a very good friend of mine, and he runs a company called Elite Squash, and we partnered up, or I went to work for him essentially, but we were trying to grow his company, Elite Squash. He had a number of county champions and British champions, and had a very, very good setup. So we were working together, and then there was a family friend back in Abergavenny who I was spending time with, and it was at that point where he introduced me to the idea of online. He saw some online tennis coaching, and he said, "Do you think we could do something similar in squash?" And I had plenty of time on my hands, so still, plenty of time on my hands, and that was where Squash Skills was born. And at that point, I was living in Bristol, So Squash Skills was trying to evolve whilst I was in Bristol. And at that same time, having moved to Bristol, kind of being a 23, 24-year-old, I think having maybe missed out on, hadn't immersed myself in kind of partying and being able to go out. Suddenly that happened as, not having the pressure of being a professional squash player. I thought, I can go out the weekend.
It doesn't matter if you have a hangover.
No, exactly. So it was like, this is cool. I really like this kind of music, and got into, started listening to house music. And it's like, this is great. I wonder if I could maybe get into DJing. Mm-hmm. So I bought some little controller and started trying to DJ really, really badly, but was very, very sociable in Bristol. So at that point I started trying to throw some smaller parties whilst launching Squash Skills. Built up a good group of friends. And with throw parties, only 30, 40 people in the basements of pubs, and it was all very basic, but I was trying really hard and trying to make friends with all the cool kids in Bristol. And
did that work?
Yeah, it did. That was where Just Jack came from. Just Jack had been around for 4 or 5 years and ticking along, and was throwing some cool parties. They were respected in the underground, but then they wanted to expand, and with my kind of social enthusiasm, I got asked to be a part of the collective. Then, so suddenly there were 5 or 6 of us, trying to grow this brand, and we took it from throwing a party, a club with 200-300 people, to now doing events with kind of 3,000 people. We're involved at festivals in Croatia, festivals in Bulgaria. Then went on to 4 of us going on to develop a record label.
Do you still do that?
I do. We've got a party tomorrow, actually, 2,500 people, and we've got festivals lined up this summer. So it's just the 2 of us now who are kind of involved in the day-to-day running of the event side of the business.
What's the name of the business, just for anyone listening?
It's Just Jack.
Just Jack. Okay.
Just Jack, and then Just Jack Recordings is the record label. Okay. So 3 of us are 3 of the guys are actively involved in the record label, and 2 of us are actively involved in the day-to-day running of the events company.
Okay, good. Because there are, I'll put a link in the show notes. But if anyone's listening who's not as interested in squash as they are in music, then this is an alternative. And there are some big festivals in Poland, and so maybe as an unlikely a possible side effect of this, maybe there could be a Just Jack event sometime in Poland. There's a really, really big Coke Live festival, and there's a Heineken opener up in the north, which are pretty big scale. But I know people in that world, and that's a nice follow up. But so you had this idea, and I suppose the good thing for Squash Skills about that is that there's a certain process in trying to promote and publicise and grow something, which it doesn't matter whether it's rocket fuel or nails or a hairdresser. You have to identify. There's a certain process of figuring out for whom this is and how to reach them, isn't there?
Absolutely. I think I learned a hell of a lot in being involved with Just Jack and understanding promotion, branding, brand identity, what's cool and what's not. Tom Rio, the person I run Just Jack with, he's a very strong influence. He was actually our first web designer, but he's brand director for Just Jack, and his creative ideas are off the charts, and I learned a lot from him. And I think that came across in the early days of Squash Skills. I was lucky enough to be in an office with some very creative people, and I think squash has always been certainly not the most glamorous or glitzy sport in the world. No, it's getting a lot better now.
It's sort of sweaty people in ugly buildings.
Yeah, I think so, and I think that was where the creative influence of Just Jack and Bristol, I hope, kind of shines through a little bit within the brand identity of Squash Skills. And I wanted to do something that was a bit cool or cooler and a bit different to what was out there in the squash world. I think Squash TV and PSA have done huge volumes for improving the accessibility of the game and the impression of the game. But 5 or 6 years ago, it certainly wasn't the case. So there was definite crossover between the music side of things and sport, which the two don't necessarily go hand in hand. But I think what we tried to do when we were building the brand and create the brand identity, that overlap, I hope, was quite apparent.
Yeah, I mean, certainly from a business point of view, if anyone was listening, thinking, "Oh, this is a good idea. Could I copy this?" There are various things you've got which would make, even if someone had really major resources, would make it really hard. Because you mentioned in the Just Jag thing, you knew all the cool kids. The squash equivalent to the cool kids are all these world famous trainers and champions. These are the people that people want to hang out with, and you can't just manufacture that. The individuals, to some extent, are part of the brand, aren't they? They go with the brand, don't they?
Absolutely, and Peter Nichols, the foundation of all of that. Peter was world number 1 for 5 years, and he was managing my print sponsorship at the time when we came up with the idea of Squash Skills, and I asked him to get involved, or if he'd like to be involved and do some videos. He said, "Oh yes, I'll do it under my print's contract." So we filmed with him in Canary Wharf, and it became apparent that he was great delivery, and he would be a wonderful asset to the site. So we offered him shares in the company. And then,
so when you say we, who was your partner for this? The guy who had the tennis idea. What's his name?
John Gallagher. Okay. And unfortunately, that didn't end well, that relationship. But he needs to be credited with introducing this idea of can we teach squash online? And it didn't pan out. Unfortunately, there wasn't a lot of cash kicking around, and we were all in different places needing different things. And John and I, we don't speak anymore, unfortunately. But he stepped out of the business, and Peter and I took it over. And I had a small amount of inheritance.
What's a small? Can you put a number to small? I noticed.
Yeah, I had about £6,000. At one point, my granddad had died a couple of years previous, and it was like, well, I think this is something I believe in, and we've flirted around the idea of getting it off the ground for probably 9-12 months, and it was going nowhere. At one point, John was kind of actively encouraging us to sell electricity and water to groups of squash clubs rather than focusing on a video, video platform.
That's what they call a pivot.
Yeah, it was a pretty bizarre setup. I was like, no, I do believe in this. We've got access to all these great players. Let's make it happen. So one day I just said to Peter, I said, look, I'm up for sticking this cash in. I believe in it. Let's do it. Let's commit to it. And we did.
And he put in money as well?
No, he put in time. He bought a few items, my pads,
and his reputation.
He's the coming back to your original question, Pete's access and friendships with world number 1s, world top 10. I mean, I had a number of relationships, but people were going to jump through hoops to help me out to do free videos, whereas Peter was running the Legends tour at the time, so he could say to those guys that he's paying them to come and do what we can come and do such as to them. Then you heard, we got a bit of feedback. He said, if you're going to come and play in the event, then I'd like you to get some videos out of you. So that kind of gave us the instant credibility.
Yeah, I mean, it's a huge thing, and I think I think it's an interesting. I don't know how much you want to share or don't want to share on a public thing about things not working out with your partner, your first partner, but it's a really important thing to recognise what people bring, and sometimes the value of someone's name can be way more than £6,000. But then in this case, and to a Polish listener, they might be quite surprised that you can get a business off the ground for £6,000, because that's at the sort of family and friends level, not at the level of. Sorry, just for listeners, that's about 25,000 zloty or 30. With Brexit and the pound going lower and lower, it'll probably be 6,000 zloty by the time someone's listening in a couple of years' time. But the basic point is that you didn't go for external VC funding. You built something that could start generating revenue with that little money. But just coming back to the reasons you fell out, and is there any advice you'd give to someone listening who's considering, innocent, they've got an idea, they're just getting it going, like what sort of things you need to nail down with your partner at the early stage to avoid sort of separation of ways being painful or difficult?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I've not been very good at getting contracts signed and agreements made. So I think getting contracts drawn up early on is good, and outlining expectations and being clear from the offset. I think goalposts always move, situations always change, but you need to know what you're putting in and what your partner's prepared to put in. I think as soon as there's an imbalance there in time and effort, it can cause friction.
Yes.
That's the reality. You want to be putting 50-50 in, and that makes, if you both feel like you're pulling the same amount, then life becomes much easier. As soon as it feels like you're not quite doing that, it becomes tougher. I think having a clarity of vision as well. I think that was the primary reason that John and I fell out. We were going off at a tangent when we were trying to sell water to squash companies. At one point, had Peter Nichols making phone calls asking if people wanted to buy discounted water, and I'm like, oh, this isn't an online squash coaching platform. This is not the vision. This is not. No.
I understand. Well, I think one comment I'd make based on multiple experiences, people quite often overestimate the value of the idea, and like the head of Dell Computers, Michael Dell, said it's 99% nuts and bolts execution, by which you mean getting things done. And someone might have the great idea of online squash coaching, but if they're not doing much work and you're doing most of the work, then it clearly, I would say the value of the idea might be 5 or 10%. And if someone said, well, I've got this idea, I've got 10,000 quid and I want 10% of the business, you go off and do it, that might be a reasonable deal, but I can support you, but I'm not going to do the work. That might be a deal that would work on a sort of a 90-10 basis, but not on a 50-50 basis, because it's like carrying dead weight in the organisation, isn't it? If you've got, it's also quite demotivating if you feel you're working for someone who's not actually isn't contributing, I suppose.
Absolutely, it's tough, but then you've got, you also have to reflect on the other value they bring, or somebody's got to put the donkey work in, and it's a balance. It's just being aware, I think, of what both parties bring, but it's much easier if you're both absolutely 100% laser focused on what you're trying to achieve. Absolutely. And you're both, or however many partners are involved, if you're all prepared to put in the same amount of effort together, life becomes much simpler, I think, as from a starting point.
Absolutely.
Sure.
And one thing that I was curious about, when you were talking about getting money together, it sounds like, did you ever apply for normal jobs, like, actually someone paying you a salary? Did you ever consider that as an option? Because for most people, like, say, well, I decided not to do that because, or I tried and no one would hire me, or whatever it was.
Yeah, I think I'm in the fortune. I don't know if it's fortunate or not, but I've never had a job interview, which is.
How old are you now?
33.
And presumably, you've interviewed other people to join your organisation.
Yes, absolutely.
So you've just been on the other side of the table, right?
That's it. Yeah, I don't know. It's an interesting one. I remember we did once we got a couple of years in, we ended up getting some investment, and I sat down with some potential investors, and they said, "What would you be doing if you weren't doing squash skills?" And I said, I think I'd be unemployable. and what I meant by that, I'm definitely a bit all over the place in terms of, I'm like a magpie, I like shiny things, and I kind of jump from project to project, but I think that's where some of the good creative elements of our business, the business has come out. I just need somebody to kind of rein me in. There was never really much of a plan beyond professional squash. And then the logical step after that was coaching, but it became apparent that I spent 28 years on a squash court. I didn't want to spend the next 40 years stood on a squash court delivering lessons. And the way to make money really in squash through coaching is to move to the States, and you're coaching kids who don't necessarily want to aspire to be world number one. They want to get their scholarship into an Ivy League college, and there's lots of coaches, they finish their playing career and they move over to the States, get paid lots and lots of money, but there's an element of childcare in there as well, and it's not just it's
not the dream, right?
That's it.
So there's a couple of things I want to pick up on. You mentioned the investment, and you mentioned let's say the vision. Talk me through why you went to get external investment and how that went, and how necessary that has been.
Yeah, so I think we got the business to a place where there was a turnover of a couple of 100,000, but we had an old dated website that we the website that I initially invested my £6,000 in. Was built in Joomla, and it was clunky and slow and very, very dated, and it became apparent that we were just kind of building on quicksand. You were trying to add new features, but we needed a new website. So that was kind of the primary driver, and we were, we'd been on a shoestring since we started. Really, Pete was hardly taking any salary. I was taking the bare amount I could to live, really, and then we were using. The staff in the office were apprentices, and Rory, our editor, who's been with us now 5 years, he was an art student who'd never done any editing himself at all. And then we had a 16-year-old apprentice, so we really were bootstrapped. But we got to this point where we had a reasonably healthy turnover, but to expand, we needed to spend a chunk of cash on a new website, a new platform. Ideally, we didn't have any marketing expertise, really, so we needed to bring a marketeer in. So at that point, it became apparent that we do need some external investment. So how do we go and seek this out? And obviously, Peter was living in New York with his wife Jess, and they have connections to wealthy squash playing families, I guess, in the States. And then I went and did Dragon's Den type thing over here in the UK. Between the two parties, the States and the UK, we raised $250,000, which we then spent very badly.
How much did you give away of the company for so?
About 12%.
Oh, that's not bad. So that's a £5 million valuation, in fact.
Yeah, we did okay. The vision. The company actually is called Learn from a Legend, and the theory behind that is you learn from legends in their respective sports.
So it's not limited to squash skills. You could be doing golf or table tennis or whatever.
Well, we have a partnership with a judo company, so Superstar Judo actually already exists. So we partnered up with another Bristol company called Fighting Films to launch the judo version, which is up there and live. It's interesting. I think that was what we sold the investors on, was this expansion into other sports, and we looked to recreate this model. It's proving tricky because you realise how much effort is required to kind of really nail the vertical of squash, because you can go really deep into squash, especially with connections, our access to squash TV footage. As soon as you start looking at other sports like tennis, you realise how expensive a proposition that could be to get off the ground. If you're looking to get ATP footage, you're looking to get other pros, they're not going to be getting out.
But if anyone listening to this is like a big cheese in the world of whatever, croquet, it could be anything, right? It could literally be anything. They've got this. Doesn't necessarily have to be you, but they're deeply into a sport, and they've got that feeling they don't want to just be teaching croquet for the rest of the. I'm picking croquet at random because I always thought that croquet is actually quite an underrated, vicious sport where you can lose friends and and you can drink and but it's as far as I know, it's never been commercialised. I haven't never researched it, but anyone who's into a sport, you could presumably. There's a deal to be done where you try and transfer know-how, but someone else has to be the leader, right? Because it needs to be an all-on full-time passion for the man or woman running it, right?
Absolutely, I think that's the thing. It requires a lot of time and effort to really nail your sport, and you need those connections within your sport. And Fighting Film Superstar Judo is doing really nicely, but it's tough. They've been ingrained in the sport again for 20, 30 years, as a company. They've got connections, and I think that's the thing with this. To get it off the ground without crazy amounts of capital requires calling in favours, and it requires access to legends and pros, and
it's easier to call in the favours if you're bootstrapping than if you're a well-funded startup. It's like doing Jethro a favour is a bit different than some sort of smarmy MBA from INSEAD or wherever. It's just like it's a different. Oh, I used to work for Goldman Sachs, now make me a free video. It doesn't really work.
No, that's right. You're completely right. And I mean, Masterclass. I don't know if you've seen the Masterclass website where they have got a short series of Serena Williams teaching tennis. They've got, I think, one of the top DJs teaching dance music production. Dead Mouse teaching dance music productions. Gordon Ramsay teaching cooking, but they're kind of shorter courses rather than really diving into a sport in the same way that we are, with that kind of depth and breadth. But people are starting to enter the space, but I think, I'm pretty sure they raised, I think it was well over 100 million, might be 200 million, and you look at the quality of that production and it's insane, but you realise, to get Kevin Spacey teaching acting, they must be paying those leaders a huge amount of cash.
I think this is a sort of project to do with someone else's money rather than your own, possibly. Exactly. It's certainly not mine. That's interesting. So I would say that the implication is that also I was going to come to like the way you acquire clients, but also the lifetime value of your clients. That if you look at the Squash Source website, there are additional things like events and holiday camps, and clearly. If you look at it, I'd say the masterclass idea is rather bad, because if you charge someone, whatever it is, $100 or $500 or $1,000 once for a short course, what happens afterwards? Whereas in principle, if someone's deeply into squash or whatever, it's not just the coach. There's other things that that you might do if this is your passion, like particularly going on a squash holiday, a squash camp, and then that might be £1,000 or £1,000 or dollars or euros, and so there's additional things that you can do for people in the context of going deep into a sport. Or like you've got the person, so presumably that's part of your strategy, isn't it, to sort of like gradually sort of build the range of things that you offer people?
Absolutely, I think that's we've offered what price point, a monthly, quarterly, and annual subscription.
And
since we started,
it's about €120 or something like that, isn't it?
For the year, yeah. So 10, 12 euros a month ish, I think. But we're trying to deliver value every week. We're putting a new series, a new playlist from a top coach or player out every week. So there's continually new content. So there's a reason to stay on board. We started off with the coaching camps 4 years ago. We were running them out of the same venue in Surrey Sports Park, kind of time after time, and people would come in for the coaches. But then we did our first camp in Amsterdam just before Christmas, and kind of as a bit of a destination camp, and you realise that all the people that have typically come to your camp in Berkhamsted or in Guildford, the same camp in the UK, suddenly go, this is great, I can go to a cool European city and turn it into a bit of holiday, and I can take the wife. So now this idea of these destination camps is the next thing. We've got this core group of, we have 24 people on the camp, and every camp we have 12 to 14 returning customers. So actually, if we can take those people to a new, exciting space and offer more value in a different city, that's absolutely part.
I mean, that's really interesting. Two of my kids are magicians, and they went off to an American magic camp for like teenage magicians. It's quite high level, and they both are capable of earning money from their tricks. But there's one idea kicking around the family is, would there be a European equivalent? Because there are these things, and you suddenly think, well, yes, you could do it as a family thing. So the parents come and have fun. Their kids being just doing sort of magic workshops, how to hypnotize people or whatever all day. And I think there's definitely something in that. So that sounds like perfect sense. And again, this could work in other sports, but it's not that easy to get a new one going. And what about your market? You mentioned you wasted most of the money, or some of the money. You spent it rather badly when you got it from the investors. So how are you wasting it, and what would you do differently? And particularly, I think many listeners are always interested in how people get clients. So if you had your squash skills video popping up on my Facebook wall, so that tells me that someone knew what they were doing. But could you explain a bit about that?
Yeah, so in terms of the web development, the investment, we spent it on the new platform, and we worked with a web development agency in Bath who we just parted ways with, and it's been a pretty, the relationship definitely degenerated to a point where it became unworkable. But I think the main reason for that was that we had this old clunky website that we needed to replace, and then we came up with all these ideas about what this future platform could be, and it had whistles and bells, and had every feature you could possibly imagine. And rather than just going, right, let's build an MVP and let's just replace what we've got, let's really nail that, let's build it for speed, efficiency, optimize it, we went in with those guys and tried to build a spaceship that had all these added features. Essentially people really like our product for the coaching content, the weekly playlists, but we've got training planners, we've got training diaries, we've got fitness programs, we've got group chat where you can speak to a coach internally, and we just massively overcomplicated it. So we built this platform that the agency quoted for. It was a big chunk of the money that we got as investment. And they said they could build it, and unfortunately they couldn't. There was a shop, we had a shop in there that we still haven't even been delivered. The shop was supposed to be delivered 2.5 years ago, and it's never gone live. So, I think that's the biggest learning.
If you need introductions to good web development houses, Google. When Google came to Krakow, they said, we're not coming because it's cheap. They're coming because of the talent, and Poland's a top 10 country in the world for developers. So, that's just out there. You might find that your mailbox starts filling in with random emails. But if you want to take an opinion on some of them, I can happily put you in touch with.
We have actually. We're working with some guys in Romania, a company called Vitamin, who it's just been chalk and cheese. The working relationship's just been incredible. We're using Slack, embracing technology, instant responses. It's just so different to the relationship we had with the guys in Bath. But the reality was that my advice to anybody going forward is, if you're going to build a new website, just build an MVP, get that working really well, and then.
And by the way, for listeners who aren't up on, most of you know, but that means minimum viable product. And there's this concept. I think there's a book by Eric Ries. I think it was about a book called The Lean Startup. And the idea is you just build something simple, get it in front of customers, listen to what they say. Don't worry about the cool guy in the room with the funky clothes who's invoicing you 1,000 something a day or an hour. Listen to customers, worry about what they say, and get feedback from them. And it's kind of obvious, but a lot of people don't do it.
It becomes really, really obvious when you spend £250,000 really badly. So that was where it kind of
Okay.
My biggest lesson, I would say, is not spending all your investment
and have clear agreements with your co-founders. And then there's two more things. One is just about your sales and marketing. Where do you get the expertise from to get your marketing message out there? And have you got someone in your team who's like really good at conversion funnels and price optimization and all that kind of stuff?
It's funny. I think marketing is one of the areas that it's the role that we've really struggled to fill. We've worked with a couple of different agencies. We've had a couple of different employees. I've spent a lot of time doing it myself, and it's something that I feel like we haven't nailed. But I guess everybody I speak to from the outside talks about how well we do social media and how much they appreciate the content. So, yeah, we've had a number of failed relationships, but I think our content, because it's new and fresh and it's engaging, isn't it? You've got world number ones telling you how to play squash. That goes down on social media. People become naturally intrigued if they're passionate about the sport, and from there they'll go and dive into the site. So content creation's never been a problem for us because we're churning out new playlists every single week.
You are a content company.
Exactly. So that's been quite straightforward. But we've actually just got a fantastic new mentor who I've been working with since April last year, and I'm working with his business partner who are piloting a kind of a marketing agency for startups. I think it can be difficult to go and find agencies. You can go and spend a fortune with a social media agency and they'll run your social media ads, but actually they're not building a sales funnel. And then if you want to go and build a sales funnel with a traditional marketing agency, it can cost you a fortune. Yes. So these guys are trying to specialise and understand if there is a model in applying kind of lean methodologies and ruthlessly prioritising tests to understand your funnel. So that we've been doing that for about 2 or 3 months.
What are they called?
Implement. Raison Logic is their company, but they're still not. It's still a pilot. There isn't an agency established yet. I'm just working with Andrew and Tim to try and understand if this works for us, if it works for them. But it's a fascinating concept, and we're changing the way we work dramatically. As I said, I'm like a magpie, I get attracted to shiny things and get distracted, whereas these guys are just ruthless prioritization. We're in Trello. We're working to OKRs. We've got 3 OKRs, and if a project doesn't relate to an OKR, project doesn't get done.
That's operational key result. Is it operation? It's a Google thing, isn't it? OKR or?
Yeah. Objectives and key results.
Objectives and key results. Yeah.
So we've got our 3 OKRs at the moment, and then sorry. So we've got our objective and key results, and then our projects fall under one of those 3 objectives.
What are your 3 OKRs?
So one is take control of the platform. So that was kind of working with the new web developers. The second one was understand the growth funnel and scalability. Understand if our revenue figures are achievable and if we can build a funnel that will allow us to scale. And then the other one is maintenance of the current subscription rate effectively at the moment. So we're trying to make sure we stay afloat, then understand what it takes to scale, and then just take control of the web platform. So nothing else exists in the company apart from those 3 key results. And then we use Trello every week. We reevaluate the projects that we're all currently working on. So everyone within the team has their face on a project. They're the leader of a project, and we just prioritise. And we have delivery projects and we have discovery projects. So delivery is, right, this is what we're going to do. We know there will be a result from this, so we're going to do this week to deliver that result. And then a discovery project is something we don't know the answer to, we don't know an answer to a question. So we're saying, is it possible to do this? What are the tests we need to do this week to answer that question? And that's what's helping us then build this funnel. And I'm still trying to get my head around it because, I get distracted, whereas these guys don't. Well, why are you doing that? What are you learning? what's the result? Is that more important than that thing? If it is, that's what you focus on. So that's the process we're now going through to build this sales funnel.
So you're being knocked into shape by these guys, basically.
Absolutely, and it's great, and I love it. I'm more than happy to be. But we're starting at the top of the funnel and working our way down.
What's your growth at the moment? How have you got a month?
About 30. January to January did 30%. 30% increase on last year.
Well, I mean, I was speaking to someone yesterday who's got a new SaaS software as a service business that's growing at 30% a month, and I'm rather jealous. Jealous is the wrong word. I'm impressed. I don't do jealousy. I think it's great. But it's once you've cracked it. And again, if everything's going fine, that's great. If you are interested in, there are some individuals I work with who do sort of marketing automation experiments, and again, there's always a question of what's the least you can spend to get a reasonable view of, is it a good idea to do slide shares, or if you don't spend enough money, it's, as they'll always tell you, you don't get a meaningful result. And if you've got a lifetime value of your customers of, I don't know, say they last for 3 years, so it might be €300, then that does limit how much you can throw at it compared to some companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at this stage, we're not looking for the 30% month-on-month growth. What we're looking for is understanding, or asking the questions to understand what will allow the business to scale to yield that growth rate. So we've got, the OKRs are maintain however many sign-ups per week to stay afloat, but it's understanding the questions that will lead to that scalability, so that hopefully it'll be, this is what it will cost to acquire those customers. If you want to scale, you're going to have to put this much money in to allow you to make that happen. Yeah. So hopefully that growth is going to come from this learning in 6 months' time. Yeah,
one feedback that I was going to give earlier, but somehow we moved on, is that I think quite an interesting. Well, I always lose money when I assume there are other people out there like me, and I tend to build products for myself in the different businesses, which is a mistake. But I think an interesting screening question when people on board is, how much time are they ready to devote to squash? Because in my case, it's a hobby that I do. If I'm lucky, I get a game in a week. Not while I'm injured, but it's the idea that, and I think there's more. So it's like how to use your platform. If you're like the occasional casual player, there's probably a lot of people out there for whom the platform, and it's great, but it is a bit overwhelming. And how to make it easy for, is there a sort of a simplified, but not necessarily cheaper? It's almost like less could be more for some people, if you know what I mean.
Well, I think the reality of, we're very aware of that, and I want to lower the barrier to entry. I think we're not fully mobile optimized. I mean, the website is optimized for mobile, but it's not a great experience at the moment. I think we need to get an app. And what I'd like to do is as what I was talking about earlier, was the fact we've offered one price point essentially for 5 years. What I want to do is offer a lower price point for less, have the current price point for a bit more, but then have a premium package, maybe incorporating, say, Squash TV membership as well, and as you talked about, monthly feedback or direct access to coaches as a premium package, and then we can look to get towards negative churn, because rather you can onboard people at the lowest level, the cheapest level, you pay $1.99 a week or $1.99 a month, and you get the content pushed to an app, and then it gets deleted after a couple of weeks, or not exactly sure what it is, but then from there, once you've got people using the product, you can demonstrate value, and then you try and encourage them to move up to the next subscription level, and then from there keep moving them up. So that's something we 100% want to achieve. I think you're completely right. It's how do you cater for the beginner, or how do you cater for the person who plays once a week? Because there's no doubt we offer value to players of all levels. Every single person who plays squash can benefit from squash skills, regardless if it's the first time they picked up a racket, or if they're a professional coach who's been coaching for 20 years, because they can get some new ideas. But it's how do you demonstrate that value, and what I don't think we do well enough at the moment is break up the information so it's logical. If you're at this level, you follow this pathway. If you're at this level, you go, take this pathway. At the moment, it's 300 playlists. Go and search for what you find useful. So there's, product development will be something really exciting to dive into over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and that brings me on to the sort of final question, which is where this is going to take you. You said you get easily distracted, and obviously you've got your other things going on, but do you have any idea where both squash skills and you personally will be in 3, 5, 7, 10, 15 years time? And by the way, this isn't a job interview, and it's not like there's a right or wrong answer. It's just like it's an unusual thing to be the leader of an enterprise, and you have so much more. It's much more of a prison, and you're much freer than a normal person in a way.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. We're just going through the process of finalising a deal with the Professional Squash Association, so they're coming on board. We're going to be much closer partnered up. So I think the Squash Skills as a company, I think I'm really keen to embed us in the fabric of the squash world indefinitely. I want to look at coaching qualifications and global coaching qualifications. I want to empower players to become coaches where they don't have access to becoming coaches themselves. I want to do an online qualification. And I think we need to become more streamlined as a business and offer these different pathways. But I think that relationship with PSA will shape where we go from here in many ways, because I think combined, we're a powerful entity, and we can really change the game. On a personal level, I want to see this achieve what it could definitely possibly, or what it can achieve. I want to follow it through to fruition. I had unfulfilled potential as a professional squash player, and I want to see Squash Skills fulfill its potential, because I need to get to where I wanted to in the squash world. But at some point, I think I need to go and do something else as well. Or I love fly fishing is a huge passion of mine. I would love to go and do something equivalent in the fishing world, which is completely out of the squash world for a period. But we'll see when we get to that point. I think we're 3, 5, 6, 7 years off of that at this stage. But on a personal level, I think it's probably I would have been involved in squash for probably 30 years at that point, and that's a long time to be consumed by a sport. But I think this model, I love, this scalable learning is something that I'm really excited about and really passionate about. And if I could take that into some other area, some other focus, then that could be interesting for me.
Okay, well, if anyone's listening to this, and we're going to wrap this now. If anyone's listening to this and wants to get in touch with you or pitch you with their idea or get your advice, what's the best way of people reaching you?
Just email Jethro@squashskills.com or find me on Facebook, Jethro Binns. I'm easily contactable through those channels. Okay,
and just before we wrap, is there anything else you think that anything you'd like to share with the audience that I haven't asked you think's important, or if there's one more thing you want to say to people about what you've learned or you think they should do, what would it be?
I think a book that's really resonated with me by Daniel Pink called Drive, which is he pushes the idea of that happiness comes from autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And I think the more you dive into that as a concept, the more you realise what makes us happy and what makes employees within a company happy. So if you can achieve that, if you can the autonomy, you're in charge, you're the one driving it, or if your employees are working for you, you're giving them autonomy over a certain area of business, you're empowering them. Mastery, if you can get really good at something, or you can allow your employees to get really, really good at something, then they're going to feel more fulfilled, you'll feel more fulfilled. And then purpose, you want to be doing something for a reason or a cause that you genuinely believe in. And when you start looking at those three things within business sense, or even on a wider scale about, with regards to life, I think it becomes very obvious and easy to identify where success will come from and what will ultimately make you happy, or make a business work, or make your employees happy. So that's something I've really dived into over the last kind of 6-12 months. And those three things, autonomy, mastery, and purpose, within a business context, makes so much sense. And that book by Daniel Pink is definitely worth a read.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes. He's also given some TED, at least one TED talk, possibly more, which I was actually lucky enough to attend his workshop when I went to a TED event in Canada in 2016, and it's very interesting because a lot of his books about happiness and contentment, and he comes across, I would say he comes across as content, but like the body language was not like, I'm not sure how happy he was. He was like absolute, like I if he's listening, which I would imagine is not going to happen, I have no evidence for this. It was just, he seemed very focused, very intelligent, extremely clear communicator, and certainly terrifically good speaker, and his books are absolutely great, so we can certainly share those. Well, Jethro, thank you very much indeed for your time. It's been really interesting to have you on the programme, and I'll drop you, I think I've got in my notes there's something I need to send you, but I can't remember what it is, but I think it's been a really, really interesting story. If your journey in life ever takes you towards Poland, you're very welcome to get in touch, and maybe we could even organise a kind of workshop, or you could give a talk here about what you're doing to a live audience. I wish you all the best. If you like this episode, please do leave us a review on iPhones or Stitcher or Breacher or whatever podcast app you use to listen to it. And if you don't like the episode, send me a polite email. We're always interested in positive feedback. Okay, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Richard. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.